Thanks for joining, everybody. We're just going to give it a minute before everyone else gets in here. It's going to be a fun space today, talking about the future of Web3 gaming. Hey, Sebastian, how are you doing today? This space is going to be getting started here in just a couple of minutes. We're going to wait for some more people to join in. We're going to be talking about the future of Web3 gaming. Really excited for the space, and thank you guys all for taking time out of your day to hop in. Welcome up. I've only read the name before, so I'm going to make sure I get it right. Is it Paima? Paima Studios? But I'm happy to have you here, and I'm really excited that you guys are building a game for Cardano. I personally believe that video games are going to be a great way to introduce people into the space.
Yeah, thanks for having us. And it's Paima, but we're not super strict on the naming.
Paima, awesome. Yeah, video games are actually what led me to blockchain. It's what gave me the knowledge on working with computers, and I actually used to run Minecraft servers when I was younger. So it's video games really did lead me into cryptocurrency and help me understand. And it really made just the idea of a token or a digital currency very native to me because I'd used so many of them in the past. So I really do think video games are a great way to merge people into blockchain and teach them about it really. So
Definitely. And from a programming perspective, it's one of the first things that people often get into programming for. So I think it's pretty exciting in terms of onboarding more devs, where if there's a nice, direction for them to go from Web 2 to Web 3 gaming and actually have like a nice path for that, then I think that will help to onboard devs and that'll help to build more dApps and so forth too.
yeah, I agree completely. We'll give it a couple more minutes, let some more people join in before we get to the juice of the show, but we'll get started a little light. How are you doing today?
Yeah, good. Yeah, working really hard. I guess we'll talk about it later, but we're releasing the first game on Milkomeda tomorrow, so obviously lots of last touches, making everything ready. So busy, but good mood.
Yeah. What is your name and your position?
So I'm Robert Kornacki. So you may know me as a CSO at DC Spark. I'm also core dev at Milkomeda, and I'm one of the co-founders at Paima Studios and leading all of the research and development.
Awesome. Yep, I know you. I just didn't know because you have that account as your name. Sebastian, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. So I'm also helping out with Paima. Obviously, Robert Kornacki is doing the bulk of the work, and I'm just here as a supporting role. Obviously, because I think that, as mentioned previously, GameFi will be a huge adoption boost to Web3 and cryptocurrencies. And I think the problem with GameFi right now is that a lot of people are taking the wrong approach in general. And I think Paima is one of the few projects that's realized that the core value of blockchain gaming comes from value accrual in your account, which is the same thing as Web2 gaming, where people, the reason they play these games is because they want to, see value accrue in their account, be it, financial value or just, some state progress in the game that they think is cool and they want to achieve. And so, I'm really happy to support the vision of Paima and all the work that Robert Kornacki and his team are doing there.
That's really exciting. And honestly, let's jump right into it. So, this is actually going to be on Milkomeda. So for someone who hasn't heard of Milkomeda, what is Milkomeda?
Yeah, Kornacki, I'm not sure if you want to take the answers by default or if you want me to take all the non-Paima ones.
Yeah, feel free to go for the non-Paima ones, and then we can split it up that way.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so the idea of Milkomeda is to try and add EVM support to non-EVM blockchains. So we've noticed that there's a lot of existing applications that have EVM Solidity smart contracts, and they may be interested in deploying to new ecosystems like Cardano, like Algorand. And it's very hard in a bear market for them to justify having to rewrite their entire smart contract from scratch to deploy to the Cardano community. It's just a huge cost. They may not have the funds for that. So with Milkomeda, you can basically take your EVM smart contract as is and deploy it to either the sidechain for Cardano or the layer 2 for Algorand. And then through the system, you get exposure to all the existing Algorand users and Cardano users for your application. It's a great way to, really reach that cross-chain future by deploying the same application in multiple places and getting exposure to more and new communities.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I've used Milkomeda myself, and I think it's great because all of the existing tooling that's been built on Ethereum, because it's really hard to come to Cardano without the tooling that we need right now. So yeah, it's a great way to bring devs and also honestly launch things indirectly on Cardano. My first question, very briefly, I also want to say, if you guys are enjoying the space so far, make sure you like and retweet that top tweet so we can bring some more people in here. We're going to give you guys the shot to ask some questions later on. So if you do that, we'll probably get some better questions later on with more beautiful people in here. So my next question is, why Milkomeda? Why design this, on Milkomeda? Obviously, you guys have launched it, but what utility comes from launching this, directly on Milkomeda instead of Cardano's layer 1?
Yeah, good question. So just to take a small step back, just to give people a little bit of context. So at Paima Studios, we're building something that's called Paima Engine, which is a brand new and novel gaming engine that allows you to build a custom layer 2 for a video game. And so just to kind of simplify that a little bit, effectively, what we allow people to do with Paima Engine is to build a game that can run on layer 2, so a layer above the base layer of the blockchain. And by doing that, we unlock a lot of new primitives, such as stateful NFTs and a bunch of other stuff that we're pioneering. And you can get a taste of, hopefully, starting tomorrow, if you come on to the Milkomeda and you try Jungle Wars, our first game we're launching. But effectively, what people can kind of understand is that rather than going the more traditional routes with games for Paima, what we're trying to do with Paima Engine is kind of go with a Web3 solution. So kind of like what Sebastien was hinting at earlier, where a lot of gaming today is what we've dubbed Web 2.5 gaming, where it's very restricted and simply being almost like a centralized exchange, where the game integrates with NFTs and tokens, kind of like a centralized exchange does. But just like a centralized exchange, the video game itself runs on private Web 2 servers. They can get hacked because it's not an open, trustless protocol. If the company goes bankrupt or if anything happens to the servers, it just, the entire game can fail, or they can mint a bunch of tokens because it's trust focused on the company itself. And so you have all the traditional Web 2 problems, but now with tokens and NFTs. And so with Paima Engine, what we kind of did is look at, DeFi was built from trustless financial primitives. So we're trying to build trustless Web3 gaming primitives with Paima Engine. And so the reason why this, getting to your question, why we've decided to deploy Milkomeda is that at Paima Studios, our vision is to push the space of gaming from Web 2.5 to Web 3, trustless Web 3 gaming specifically. And to do that, we believe, we're really excited about the Cardano community and the space related to NFTs and everything that's building here. But we also think that blockchain gaming as a whole really is something that needs to be tackled from a fundamental level. And so with Paima Engine, because it's a layer 2, there's, optionality in the long term to even redeploy on Cardano or even go to Algorand layer 1s in each respect. However, from a user standpoint, we really think this tech is exciting, so we want users to try it out. And so deploying on Milkomeda makes the most sense from that perspective, because Milkomeda is expanding into multiple ecosystems. And so with that vision of Paima Studios, it makes a lot of sense to keep moving from ecosystem to ecosystem, to keep developing and providing this tech to more people, because we really do think this will change the face of blockchain gaming.
So with the Paima Engine, what utility does that offer to people that want to use that engine? Is it, purely, a blockchain engine? Like, does someone creating a video game also have to use Unreal Engine and then Paima engine to tie it all together? Or is, Paima really the only game engine that you need to build a video game on the blockchain?
Great question. Yeah, so in a stereotypical Web2 point of view, when most people think of game development, you're right, they just think of Unity or Unreal. However, if you're looking at any large-scale games, they're actually split up between a front end and a back end. Because Unity and Unreal, they offer some basic back end plugins or add-ons that allow you to have servers set up and really simplify the process. But anything at real scale or anything complex or new, you always have to actually separate that out. And so you only use Unreal and Unity for the front end. And if you want an online multiplayer experience, every major AAA game runs their own backend servers and their own backend server stack. And so effectively, Unreal and Unity don't really work from that perspective for just solving both sides. And so from the blockchain perspective, Paima engine is specifically solving that back-end solution. And so in the current moment, we're working towards building out stronger and stronger integration with existing front-end solutions, specifically Unity first, and eventually we'll probably move towards Unreal. But yes, this is something that it's effectively a two-step process between building the front end and then building the blockchain-based back end, which, as I mentioned, is a layer 2. And so that's there's a little bit of complexity before we can smoothly integrate that all at once together with the front end, but it is something we're looking at in the long term.
So if someone wants to actually use Paima engine, with their existing video game, how do they do that? Do they have to work directly with you guys? Is that something that people can do now, or are you really launching, your own game, which is Jungle Wars NFT Rebel, which we'll get into here in a minute? Are you launching that to really start doing the initial testing before you, open this engine up for other people to be able to use? And, do they have to pay for it? I'm just kind of curious about that.
Yep. So effectively, the way we're going into this is that from our perspective, Paima engine's kind of going into uncharted territory, right? So let's say in DeFi or even in layer 1 VMs or consensus protocols, these are all trustless protocols that we're more familiar with because they've existed in the world for 1, 2, 5, some of those up to 10 years, to go all the way back to the start of Bitcoin. And so understanding what are the possibilities and the go-to design patterns is very clear for some aspects. And obviously in some parts of DeFi and other stuff, in DAOs and so forth, we're still discovering new stuff. And so with Paima engine, no one's really spent a lot of time into trustless Web3 gaming. There's a few projects here and there, more in the Ethereum space, like Dark Forest, for example, but no one's really delved in and figured out what is possible and what are the new primitives. And so because of that, with Paima engine, so as I mentioned, we have stateful NFTs as one of the first primitives that we've come up with that is genuinely new. Stuff like this, because it's never been done before, it inherently has a level of complexity that takes time to fully properly implement, and then a level of complexity to make it simple to use, right? It's kind of a two-step process, or 3, I guess, if you consider research, implement, simplify, which would be the first 3 steps in that case. And so right now, if you consider that 3-step, very, very high-level roadmap for features and new discoveries that we want to implement, we're currently in the process where Paima engine is hitting its very first checkpoint and release specifically, where we feel comfortable that everything that is implemented is robust enough so that we can deploy Jungle Wars tomorrow, and that will survive for the next 10 plus years, 20, 30, 40 years, because it's a trustless protocol that eventually will be able to run completely without us and just go on forever, just like any other decentralized protocol. That said, we're kind of in the midst of, we did a lot of research. I have like 30 plus different papers or markdown files that we have internally for all the different features and stuff we're implementing. And now we're getting to the cusp of the implementation that people can actually start to test. And so now we're moving towards the simplifying part, the 3rd step. And so to kind of answer your question more directly with that in context, effectively at this point, we're focused on making Paima engine really solid in an implementation standpoint and using it to deploy games. And so, as you mentioned, we have Jungle Wars tomorrow being released. We also have 2 further games that are currently in development as well, using newer features of Paima Engine as well. And so going into later and later in this year, we're going to really get closer to solidifying everything as we release the next games. And then once it's solidified, we can then simplify it and then start to onboard other developers. So today, that means that we don't have anything that's ready to go for developers to start jumping on board. However, we will start to talk and start to partner with entities and various games and other projects who are looking to maybe take a stab at trustless Web3 gaming. And as we get closer, we're probably going to start a slower kind of release. So we're going to start with partners that have a bit more experience, who can deal with a little bit earlier software that's not fully, perfectly documented, just super ready for everyone to use. But over time, as our first partners get a taste and they start to develop and build stuff, they'll also give us lots of feedback. We'll be able to improve. And then eventually we'll get it to a point where we do reach that step of simplification. And then we can release Paima Engine for others to use to build games as well.
Awesome. There's one thing that you mentioned in there, and we're going to go into Jungle Wars directly after this. If you guys are enjoying the space, make sure you like and retweet that top tweet to bring some more people in for questions. You mentioned stateless NFTs. Can we go a little bit into that? What is a stateless NFT, and how does that compare to a traditional NFT?
Yeah. So specifically, they're stateful NFTs. And so the concept of stateful NFTs is effectively, I sat back in April or May of 2022, and when we're looking at NFTs for gaming, we kind of realized that gaming today for blockchain, with or without NFTs, is like Web 2.5, which I mentioned earlier. But with NFTs, the value proposition of the NFTs themselves was something that I was really interested in. Because if you look at existing games that had, a lot of traction, like Axie Infinity, for example, the NFTs were really popular. They had a really, really high price, and they brought speculators a lot of excitement. But then, when Axies went from $300-$400 to $20, the actual experience for real players who were excited about the game, it greatly diminished because some of them bought in at $200 and then they lost a lot of money, but the gameplay experiences are the same. But then everyone is, the entire community kind of falls apart because this speculation aspect to the NFTs disrupts the actual experience of playing the games. And from that experience and that perspective of looking at that and looking at the tech that we were developing with Paima Engine, I started to think about what's the actual value proposition, which is something that actually Seba mentioned a little bit earlier today, where people typically play online games because they gather state, right? So I play an MMO, a massive multiplayer online RPG or otherwise, generally because I want to level up my character. I want to get equipment. I want to get skills. I want to customize my character in a certain way. These are all things where you start with an initial state. So, your character at level 1 with base stats or whatever. And when we have current NFTs today, these NFTs are just that base character, right? There's no way you can level that up in a very stateful manner. There's no way you can add equipment. There's no way you can do all this stuff to the NFT itself because they're just NFTs. They're kind of like a rock, right? It's a beautiful statue, but you can't do anything to it. And the only way people have managed to do stuff with the current NFT architecture is by burning NFTs, right? So it's kind of like you have, a beautiful sculpture made of gold, but then you have to melt the sculpture to then make it something else. And so inherently, that's not the same experience, and you can never replicate the same experience of like an MMO where your character gains experience, it levels up, it gains skills, because the act of buying an NFT, burning it every time doesn't scale. It costs a lot in transaction fees. It's very, you're trying to put a square peg in a round hole where it's not quite the perfect fit, and it'll never have the gameplay experience that you actually want. And so with stateful NFTs, what I realized is that kind of like how we want players to feel, Web3 gaming is really a new step forward, not just trying to kind of copy all the ways with, blockchain tech that already exists, but looking at what are the actual fundamental primitives that we can use to get something completely new. And so what stateful NFTs are NFTs where actions in the game directly mutate the state attached to the NFT. So this means that with stateful NFTs, we can have characters, just like in a classical MMORPG, where you have a game using Paima engine, and you say you face a boss, right? And you face the boss of 2 or 3, or a team of 8 people. It could be a raid of 16 people. Classical MMO style gameplay. And by facing that boss and having it all posted at the layer 2 level on chain, we can then, because we have that transparency, because we have that trustlessness, because we have that determinism and reproducibility of everything being posted on chain, we can then have this perfect record of all the state attached to the NFT that can never be removed, right? Because it's not on some private server of some game company, like a lot of Web 2.5 games do, but it's actually a trustless protocol on chain. And so then the state of the NFT is tied directly to the NFT, and that can never be removed as long as the blockchain exists. And so that's kind of the really exciting part of stateful NFTs, is that now we have what classically existed in the Web 2 world and what got people excited about MMOs in the first place. We now have that as a primitive thanks to Paima engine. And this is one of the things that we're doing a very first iteration of stateful NFTs with the launch of Jungle Wars, but going into 2023 for third game especially that we have right now in a really early design phase. But that's going to be probably the very first premier game with deep stateful NFT integration. And we're going to start to see kind of the fruits of what this new technology can actually bear.
My mind is running with a million ideas because it's definitely something that's necessary, and it makes sense that is where we're going to go to. But my next question is, where does that data live? Currently the way it works is, like, let's say you have an NFT, and a user does something in an application or a video game. They're going to have to go back, and they're going to have to burn their NFT, and they're going to have to mint a new one with that updated data. And if you think about this from a customization perspective, if an application is being built based on user customization, and that user customization is embedded in the NFT metadata, and then they go to change it, they're going to have to burn it and then mint it again to get the new update. So, that lives in the metadata. So where does that data live in this, new type of NFT? How do you, essentially update that and, and put that data on chain without actually burning the NFT?
Yeah, great question. So specifically, this goes back to what I was saying earlier about what makes Paima engine really unique, is that Paima engine, when you write your game using Paima engine, what you're doing is actually implementing a layer 2 virtual machine. And so what that means is that any state changes to the global state, so in the case of a game, you win a match, you do something, that automatically gets updated at the layer 2 level. The fact that it's updated at the layer 2 level, and because we have Paima engine, which is I think it's the first engine of its kind in not just gaming, but in blockchain too, where it's an engine to build your own custom layer 2s, which I'm not sure I've seen other projects that have done this yet. But what's really cool about that is because we're not implementing a layer 2 VM that we want games to be built on, but we're building an engine that builds custom layer 2 VMs. What this means is we have new primitives like passive time that allow us to automate and do a lot of new things that simplify the aspect of updating these NFTs. So specifically with passive time, this is something that's really cool because in typical blockchain smart contract platforms, whether that's Cardano, Algorand, Ethereum, every single smart contract platform up to date, it's in order for anything to take place on the blockchain, someone has to submit a transaction and someone has to sign data. And so this is a big issue with previous attempts at making on-chain games because pretty much all PvE, so player versus environment games with boss battles, random AI, or even player versus player matches where stuff is supposed to happen automatically, all of that has always been impossible in the world of blockchain gaming because someone had to submit a transaction. And so that means you have to hopefully trust that person to actually be there. You have to hope they have enough money to pay for the gas fees. You have to hope that they get included at the right block height. So you have all this non-determinism and these externalities that make stuff happen automatically, so quote unquote passive time. It just didn't work in the old model. And so the fact that we have custom layer 2s for each game, and Paima Engine by default ships with this ability of having passive time, this means that the NFTs can actually update passively at the layer 2 level, and it doesn't cost any layer 1 transaction gas costs, and no one has to submit a transaction. And so we start to kind of open up and develop a new model where you could submit, for example, a very basic example is, you have a character in a game, you set them out for kind of an idle adventure game. They go traveling across a map for 24 hours passively, and every hour they gain a bit of experience, or they have a chance of finding an item. And every hour, I don't have to post a transaction, no one else has to post a transaction, but just the state of the attached to the NFT, which is the unit in the game going on the adventure, gaining experience, just happens automatically by itself because we have this trustless protocol as a layer 2.
So would these types of NFTs even be possible on Cardano's layer 1, or did this layer 2 have to be designed in a way that would allow this adaptation over time?
Yeah, great question. So of note, this type of NFT, stateful NFTs, cannot work on any layer 1 today by itself. And so it's only possible thanks to Paima Engine. However, that said, right now, as you mentioned, we're deploying to Milkomeda because it makes the most sense for really hitting different ecosystems and bringing this tech to the blockchain space as a whole. However, there is inherently, besides resources and time and focusing on shipping stuff that people can really get in their hands and enjoy, there's no reason why Paima Engine can't be used directly on Cardano for games. And the only thing that would need to be done is there'd have to be a deeper integration into the Cardano NFT standards to actually fully support the stateful NFT nature. And so this is something that's more of a totally doable. We have rough designs for how to do it. But in terms of in the immediate future, we're really focused on getting the tech solid and available for everybody. And we're looking at what are the wins that people can really experience and enjoy. And so, not to take that question too far to the side, but one thing we're also working on that I've dubbed as Paima Whirlpool, which will in the near future, probably in the 2 to 3 month time span, even though the game of Jungle Wars will be deployed on Milkomeda C1, people on Cardano mainnet will be able to use their Cardano wallets, so Flint wallet, Name wallet, name your favorite wallet, and they'll still be able to play Jungle Wars thanks to Paima Whirlpool. And this is another new piece of tech that is inspired by some stuff from the roll-up world, however, with a new spin thanks to the fact that we have these custom layer 2 VMs thanks to Paima Engine. And so what we're doing with Paima Engine is developing the base of the tech, as you mentioned, stateful NFTs and so forth. And then we're going to go into ecosystems, both deploying directly in each ecosystem and then using Paima Whirlpool to allow other ecosystems to also interact with games. So, theoretically with Paima Whirlpool, one day, people maybe even on Ethereum or Solana or other blockchains can actually interact with the Milkomeda C1 deployment of Jungle Wars. And so we really see this future where the tech solidifies and we can kind of go step by step and hitting all the integration points that everyone wants. And so then in that way, we really bring the tech to everybody.
That's really exciting. I think that there really is a barrier to entry with video games that are in collaboration with blockchain, and it really is that multi-chain world that we live in. If someone has an ETH wallet set up and they have to download a new wallet for every other video game, that definitely becomes a problem. But let's jump straight into Jungle Wars. If you guys are enjoying the space so far, make sure you like and retweet that top tweet. Reply and tell us you're liking it. It'll just bring more people into the space, and then you guys will have some more great questions come up. So Jungle Wars is actually launching tomorrow. So, let's go into that. What is Jungle Wars? What type of video game is it?
Yeah, so Jungle Wars is effectively a casual PvP game that mimics the feel of rock, paper, scissors on steroids. to be a little bit blunt. Effectively, it's a fun, casual game you can play with your friends that allows you to get a taste of some of the primitives of Paima Engine. So we have the very first stateful NFTs with the Paima Volcaneers integrated into Jungle Wars. And you have a nice gameplay that resembles kind of your classical, more FPS or third-person shooters or kind of online games where you have lobbies that people create. You customize how many rounds you want to play, what character you want to choose, and then you face 1v1 in a game where you try and predict where your opponent moves on a 2D map. Sorry, a 1D map from your perspective. And there you're trying to guess, will the person move to a certain space? Think about whether you want to kind of do mind games and kind of have a psychological element of predicting, will someone try and shoot at you, with a little bit of fun and randomness thrown in to kind of just make this more of an enjoyable experience for whether someone's a pro gamer or really wants to optimize, or just casual and they want to have fun with their friends on a Friday night. Effectively, Jungle Wars is from two sides. It's something that people can enjoy because it's fun, easy, within 2 minutes, you should fully understand exactly how the game works, but with a lot of showcasing of the features of Paima Engine. And that's kind of what we're approaching with Paima Studios, is that with each game we're releasing, and as I've mentioned, we're currently working on 3 games. And so Jungle Wars is releasing tomorrow. Our second game, which we haven't announced yet, it is 50% of the way done, and the third game just in the design phase. But with each game, and Jungle Wars being the first, we're showing off what is possible with Paima Engine and with the tech we're building. And so specifically in Jungle Wars, for players, you get to experience what's the actual gameplay flow like with games using Paima Engine. And of note, people do have to submit transactions to play the game, but in the near future, with something we're developing called Paima Batcher, this will actually be very simplified in the future, and eventually the gameplay flow will be optimized and smoother and faster. And so this very first iteration, obviously, it's the first iteration of the tech. We're really excited, and we think the gameplay is up to our standards of enjoyment, of quality overall, but the tech will get better. And so Jungle Wars is effectively showing off what is possible with Paima Engine at a first step level, where we have a roadmap probably for the next year and a half or so of things that we want to implement step by step. And as I mentioned, with the following games, we're going to get more and more complex with the games themselves. And so we really want to get people excited about the tech and about the games them too, and start to build a community that sees what is the potential here, and then really move from there moving forward.
Awesome. For the viewers in the chat, we're going to be moving into viewer questions in about 10 minutes, so stay tuned if you have any questions. My next question for you is, how do people actually play this game? Is it free to play? Is there an NFT that you have to purchase first, or how do you get access?
Great question. Yeah, and so this is something fundamental at Paima Studios, which we don't want to bring big barriers to entry into our games. And I think this is something Seba mentioned lately as well earlier, where we think that whole model of just big gates where you have to buy an NFT for 10, probably, like 90, 100, 200, $500, that's not really a way for long-term sustainability. And we really do believe this tech is unique enough that we should make that barrier to entry as low as possible. But with innovations like stateful NFTs, offer people that optionality to get a better gameplay experience, but not at a high cost. And so for Jungle Wars, if you want to play, starting tomorrow, you can go to paimastudios.com and you'll instantly be able to go to the Jungle Wars section. You'll click play the game and you'll jump right in. The only thing that you need to do is to have a MetaMask or EVM wallet set up with the Milkomeda network. If you don't have one set up already, you can just start to play the game and it'll automatically add the Milkomeda network into your wallet. And then you simply need to move some ADA. You can simply move 1, 2, 5, 10 ADA from Cardano mainnet to Milkomeda C1. When you're playing the game, you simply submit a few transactions and you're paying a very, very low fee. That's, I think, around half a penny per move you submit. And so there's effectively no barrier of entry to play. It's effectively free. And you have the optionality where you can buy a Paima Volcaneer, which we currently have priced at if I recall correctly, 10 Milkomeda. So between, if you want to buy a Volcaneer to get the full initial stateful NFT experience of playing Jungle Wars, where your wins, losses, and ties are recorded in the game, you can unlock a character and other stuff like that, get on the leaderboards, show that you're the best in the game. And all of these features, to unlock all of them, you simply have to buy a Volcaneer for 10 Milkomeda, and that price will be stable going forward. And effectively, within 10 to 15 Milkomeda, you can pretty much have as much fun as you want playing Jungle Wars. And if you don't want an NFT, you could even play with half an ADA or an ADA. And that's completely sufficient.
So with that NFT that you get, when you look at like Axie Infinity and you look at these other blockchain games, and really, a lot of people in this space, they come here for money. They want to just make money from something. And, I'm not in any way insinuating that that's your goal or intention with this game. I'm just curious on, with that NFT that you purchase, as you level it up over time and you get those NFT, stats, is there any like value creation from that? Or are you guys actually focusing on the opposite, building a game that uses, the values of blockchain and then, taking out the Axie Infinity style, play to earn, build up and earn NFTs over time? Is it really just using the NFT for, the utility that blockchain offers instead of, creating that type of experience like Axie Infinity?
Yeah, great question. So effectively, we're trying to do the both, but not with the negatives, which is obviously a little bit ostentatious, you could say. But effectively, for the first game, with the Volcaneers, the functionality of stateful NFTs is more limited because it's the first iteration of stateful NFTs. It's going to be really exciting, I think, for players to start out using the Volcaneers within Jungle Wars, and Volcaneers will also be integrated into our second game for sure. And so you can use this to develop your track record in the game, and eventually we'll probably have cosmetics and a few other things that kind of unlock over time as you play and as you level your stats. And so there will be some value accrual there. However, with the Volcaneers, we're not going full into the absolute potential of stateful NFTs, because first of all, from the implementation standpoint, we really want to optimize stuff and get stuff to a point where at scale, it's much more palpable to do everything we want to do. And so there's a few steps we have to do on the back end side of things to get Paima Engine fully ready for the full potential. But then also from the actual game theory standpoint, and what you're kind of hinting at, is that there's a precise, there's a narrow path, one can say, of how you design the mechanics of state accrual or value accrual in games so that you don't get the Axie Infinity effect. And so that's why we're spending a lot of time designing our third game for the full stateful NFT implementation that will have value accrual, but with game mechanics that don't hyper or pretty much predisposition speculators as being at the forefront at all. And instead, what we want to design is a game where, yes, you can accrue a value with your stateful NFT, which is a unit in the game. Yes, if you spend hours and put in the time, that actually has value and other people will probably want it. But we don't want this to be this major barrier of entry. And so, for example, all stateful NFTs that we're building, so Volcaneers for the first two games, and for the third game, we'll have a new class of stateful NFTs, most likely in addition to the Volcaneers. All of this will come together, and all of these NFTs that I'm talking about right now, they'll have no cap and an unlimited supply, meaning no one is ever burdened with having to buy on the second market, to scalpers, to people who are, trying to just take a really fat, profit off of you for doing nothing effectively. But instead, if someone spends a lot of time, beating bosses for multiple months in a row, they've done all these hard achievements and they've managed to get a really lucky drop, or their unit is, had 10,000 hours or whatever, and it's specifically valuable because of all that effort, it does have some value. And while that person and that unit and that piece of equipment is on the competitive edge, it most likely will have value. And so what we're really focused on, once we get into the depths of stateful NFTs, is optimizing everything around not speculators, but actual players and players who do really well in the game and actually generate value. And so from our perspective, we think the goal of having players earn some money from their games, like play to earn, at scale where every single person who ever plays the game will be able to make money. That doesn't actually work in the real world because botters and a lot of other stuff will make it impossible, and speculators will also make it impossible. I have a video on this if someone wants to look at our YouTube channel talking about the issues of play to earn. But we can still play with the game theory around the design of the games such that we can still allow people who are at the edge, at the top of the game, to have the extra edge in what they accrue and what they manage to build with their stateful NFTs. And that will inherently have value while that's still relevant in the meta of the game. And then that does translate into people who love the game, put a lot of time and effort, can actually probably on the secondhand market, or excuse me, like the NFT marketplaces, use their stateful NFTs and sell them and offer them to others who want to get those gameplay experiences without putting in all of those hours themselves.
Awesome. Yeah, that really answered my question well. If there's any viewers in the chat and you guys are enjoying the space, make sure you like and retweet that top tweet to bring some more people in. And go ahead and start requesting speaker if you guys have any questions about, Paima Studios or the game that's launching tomorrow. And I asked this a little bit earlier, and I know that, you guys are going to be releasing 3 games over the next year. Will the first game continue to be updated, say a year from now or 6 months from now? Or do you have like a finished product timeline in sight because you are working on so many different, products at the same time?
Yeah, so we, from the perspective of the games we're releasing, we want to be very community oriented. And because of that, we want to take kind of a approach where we're moving forward at a steady pace. So, we're, like I've mentioned, we have plans for 3 games this year, with the second one halfway into the development cycle. And effectively, if a really strong community forms around a specific game, we will definitely keep supporting, building, and growing it further and further. But we have to kind of balance our resources for the time being, right? Paima Studios is a new startup. We have limited resources, and we're really excited about the tech. And so right now, we're really, really focused on moving forward and building key features into Paima Engine, and then bring that out into the new games, and eventually allowing, as I mentioned earlier, other partners to start to use Paima Engine and kind of get all this rolling and snowballing. With that said, if a really strong community forms around Jungle Wars, people love it. And of note, one thing we're going to be starting to do more this year with the release of Jungle Wars now, we had a pre-release tournament for people in our Discord, our OGs, people who really got into Paima Studios, into the Paima community early. But we're going to be doing a series of tournaments over this year for Jungle Wars, eventually for the second game and so forth. And what we want to do is start to build these communities. And if there's a great, strong community presence, we're definitely going to support the community. And that support both goes with stuff that's like community events, like tournaments. But then eventually, if there's a really strong demand for continuing the development of these games, then we're very happy to keep putting in resources as long as there is that excitement for the game itself.
When do you think, people will be able to use the Paima engine? A 1-year timeline, a 2-year timeline, other than just playing the video game, of course.
Yes. So our goal is by the end of the year to have partners starting to develop with Paima engine. And so what that means in practice for your everyday dev, that's probably by the end of the year, we'll start to give a much stronger roadmap for that. Because as I've mentioned, we're developing various features in Paima engine at the same time. There's already a couple of different paths in terms of scalability, solutions that we already have in a medium to close to finishing perspective of the design base for how we want to make Paima engine scale, not just to 1,000 concurrent players, but eventually being able to one day maybe even hit hundreds of thousands or even millions of players concurrently experiencing and enjoying the actual gameplay of the game. And there's a lot of things that we can do because we're doing this novel layer 2 solution where we're actually creating an engine that deploys or that creates a new L2. And so there's a lot of stuff that we have to kind of iteratively decide on in terms of what are the highest priorities, right? And so we really want to get this out first to gamers, right? We want to make the games, want to use the engine so that people can get a taste of what trustless Web3 gaming is like. Because people don't really understand the value prop or have a really fun experience playing these games and seeing what is the potential of stateful NFTs and so forth, then, putting in all the effort to get it ready for developers is just not the right order. And so by focusing on the players first, we can then start to move on getting the core essentials that we know, players really love, that then developers will want to use in their games. And from there, they'll be able to then build these games, not waiting for us to deploy this new feature, but everything will be baked in, batteries included. And so it's kind of a small balance game that we're going to probably have to start to play more deeply in the second half of this year, in deciding what are the essential features that we definitely want to implement fully before we offer Paima Engine to outside partners. And so going into the end of the year, we'll start to really nail that down and then share that with everyone as well.
Awesome. Blockjock actually had a great question. If there's any people in the chat that want to come up and ask a question, feel free. If you have stage fright, no worries. Just reply to that top tweet up there and I'll make sure I get your question asked. Blockjock states, is there a possibility that other Cardano NFT projects, could be a part of this as well? As far as, bringing, other projects in the space and as characters or skins, maybe that's not going to be available in the first game, but have you guys thought about that idea? And, maybe for the third game or the second game, allowing, existing Cardano NFTs to come in there on Milkomeda, or, come in some form.
Yes. So there's a lot of potential paths for that kind of stuff. So I guess the first thing on that topic I'd like to say is that we are quite open to work with partners in various different levels in regards to implementation and so forth. So we do have an admittedly aggressive roadmap for everything we're trying to build. And so doing custom integrations for a bunch of different projects is slightly out of scope for us, just because, we don't have millions of people working under us. We have a, core team of 3 core devs, which is going to be expanding slightly to 4, plus me leading, and Seba and Nico doing really strong support as well. But this is, a very tight-knit team that we have to actually really move forward with our plans to get everything that we want to achieve done. That said, we are interested in working with projects on potentially doing some slight integrations in terms of cosmetics. And so if someone has a really exciting class of NFTs and they feel maybe in Jungle Wars they want to get some cosmetics on the animals, for example, or do other kind of higher level implementations that are kind of not, they don't take very serious dev time to fully implement. And it's something that we can kind of work together on and build together in terms of like the assets for the graphical assets and so forth. We're more than happy. And if anyone is interested in kind of doing those kinds of partnerships, please feel free to contact us. You can go to our website at paimastudios.com and go through the contact form to talk to us. So we're more than happy to start to work with partners in that aspect. Specifically to your question about Cardano native NFTs being supported within Jungle Wars and these games, as I've mentioned, that full integration support of native Cardano NFTs is not implemented yet. And so this is something that we have on the long-term roadmap for various blockchains, specifically with Cardano being one that we've gotten the most feedback from people that they want. And so it is something we're looking at, but within balancing everything, it's not something I can give anyone an exact timeline or date on. But we're more than open to be in discussions with various projects, whether you want to use Paima Engine, have an integration with Jungle Wars, or do anything of that nature. Please feel free to contact us, and we're more than happy to talk.
Awesome. So we are in the viewer question stage. So reply to that top tweet if you are stage fright, or request speaker come up and raise your hand. And we have our first taker here, Salamander. What is your question, my friend?
Hey, what's going on, Big Pay, Paima Studios? So I've been listening in, interesting stuff. So my question is, you guys mentioned that, you're really building this for gamers and not for speculators. Having said that, I'm somewhat of a speculator. I basically I like what you guys are building, and I would like to invest in it by buying NFTs if possible. So my question is there any benefit or purpose in buying multiple NFTs or buying these NFTs early, or is it really just buy one and then play the game when the time comes?
Yeah. So there's two answers to this question. In the short term, we don't have any with the Paima Volcaneers, the current stateful NFTs that we have released, the first iteration. There's effectively no real benefit for speculators besides the fact that with Paima Volcaneers, the Volcaneers are being released in batches. So the first batch is 2000, and they have custom unique backgrounds. And so if you, from a speculator standpoint, think those backgrounds and the fact that the first 2000 will be valuable because Paima Studios will be really popular and a lot of people want Volcaneers, there's theoretically some speculative chance that might raise in value. And for example, something that in the Paima Discord, a lot of people got excited about is that some of the Volcaneers, and it's a very small percentage, have a crown property on the head, and that's quite rare thus far. And so there's some stuff like that where we do have a bit of scarcity just out of pure random chance, or the fact that the different epics of Paima Volcaneers have different backgrounds. And so if you think that's valuable, that might one day become something to speculate on. However, for the first game and with Volcaneers, we're really trying to make the barrier of entry super, super small, simple, and trying not to benefit speculators. And in the future, once the games have a really deep stateful NFT integration, there's theoretically options to speculate, not based off of kind of this naive negative speculation that games typically have, where people try and do pumps and dumps as much, but more from an actual gameplay perspective. So for example, if you studied the gameplay mechanics as someone who wants to speculate, and you really think, oh, this item, this piece of equipment that's unused by almost everyone in PvP, it's actually really, really, really good when used in this specific way with this other piece of equipment in this other unit. And if this, this strategy is amazing and no one's found it yet, and if you figure that out first and you buy out the market, and then you say you release a tutorial video and you show everyone, hey, you can do this, 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 and then this destroys everyone else in PvP. That's something, for example, where you have, this information asymmetry based off of your skill in terms of analysis and actually knowing the game that you can then speculate on in a kind of more of a classical MMO economic fashion rather than more of just a pump and dump crypto fashion. And so that's really what we're focusing on building is enabling the people who have a greater insight, greater ability to play the game well, pretty much an edge in actual gameplay to then have a benefit, but not just allow speculators who then, it's great for everyone to make money, but the negative disincentives that are in play when you focus on speculators, allowing people just to earn money trivially by pumping and dumping, that inherently breaks the game economies and actually the excitement of the player base and the community itself from our perspective, that we do our best to not focus on that, but still, focus on the gameplay itself.
Okay, interesting. So a couple of follow-up questions just in terms of like the future plans.
Yeah, it's AI Love's turn, and then we got Pricepo, and then we can come back to you. Sorry, just a little short on time, but I would love to get your question.
Hey, how you doing, Sebastien?
No problem.
How you doing? Happy New Year to both of y'all. I think this is the first time.
Happy New Year, brother. Thanks for coming up. What you got for us today?
Man. It's just one of them kind of conundrums to where I'm like, I hear things where it's like, you don't want it to be incentive-based and speculative, but, look, that's the marketplace that we're in. I just want to give you a little heads up. Let me ask you a quick question as far as the contingencies of further development. How much does this lean on the success of this project minting out? because if it really doesn't impact it, then sure, run with that. But if it does, then might want to re-examine that for the wellness of the team, right? Because without the numbers driving, and how we're going to accomplish, and this is where I look at a lot of NFT projects. It's like basically we're getting crowdsourced funding from the community to develop these sort of things. You guys have already, you're in the process of developing it. How much of the remaining budget that's left over is contingent on the mint? Is it any at all, or is it still in motion whether it mints out or not?
Yeah, so we're in a very medium to long-term focus with Paima Studios. And so the money that we make from the mint is obviously great and helpful, but it's not something we're focusing on because we're really right now in this phase. We're more focusing on the vision of what can be. And so we're not really worried about the short term, whether we make money immediately or not. And so, we're in a pretty rough time in the global markets overall. But Paima Studios, we do have a runway to suffice, even with the first, Vulcaneers not going super crazy and getting hundreds of thousands of dollars or so forth. That's actually pretty much doesn't affect us at all, and is actually for now perfectly fine because what we're doing is building primitives and then looking to really maximize on top of that afterwards. And so, as I mentioned, like the second and third game, they're going to be using more complex and more exciting features of Paima Engine. And so then the games themselves will start to be deeper, have greater depth, and then, communities can actually build around playing the games because like the PvP will not just be more of a casual game, but it'll rival just, a strategy game or whatever else, so that there's actual enjoyment and that can last longer than, say, a few hours here and there, or really just add enough depth where the community itself can start to, say, balance the game. And that's something that'll be featured in the second game, for example, where we'll allow, eventually, probably not initially at release, but we'll allow the players of the game to actually change the game mode in a sense of balancing the stats of units and so forth. And that kind of stuff is what we think will actually drive people to get excited, both about the games and Paima Engine. And our real focus for success is over the long term of showing we have something new, getting people to taste it and see that, hey, this is actually awesome. And then we actually focus on making this much more heavily monetizable. But we believe that the primitives and the fundamentals will bring people to it rather than focusing on making money upfront first.
Yeah, if I can add to that as well briefly. So obviously, Paima Engine is being built by Paima Studios, but there's going to be other companies that, will be able to build games using Paima Engine and be profitable in their own way. So it's going to be an open ecosystem from that perspective. And because of that, because this is not just a project for us, it's a project for everybody, as Kornacki mentioned, really building the primitives and building this ecosystem. We've also gotten support from Catalyst as well as the Algorand Foundation as well for the development of this for some of the initial work.
I'm gonna have to have a one-on-one sit down with you, Sebastien, about Algorand, because I keep hearing you toss it out, man. And another thing, I just real quick, just a last question.
We got to go on to the next person, AI Love. I'm sorry. One question per person. We low on time. If you guys are enjoying this space so far, make sure you like and retweet that top tweet. If you have any questions that weren't asked up here, but your stage fright, just comment on that tweet. And next up is Price Pro.
Hey, thanks for letting me ask my question. And I apologize if this question got answered earlier on the call, but whenever I think of bridges, I get nervous. And I'm just wondering what kind of security and risk mitigation are you guys building in just to make sure that the users are protected?
Great question. Yeah, so effectively, the cool thing to note here is that from the game's perspective, which, as I mentioned earlier, is a layer 2 that's effectively pops out of Paima Engine when you develop your game. From the underlying chain's perspective, so in the case that we're deploying on Milkomeda C1, maybe eventually once we, as I mentioned, at one point implement all the core primitives. We can even deploy a game or allow other companies, as Seba mentioned earlier, to deploy directly on Cardano layer 1. The actual trust for what is happening is all dependent on the underlying layer 1. And so what that means is that because we have a trustless protocol, because it's a layer 2, everything is fully deterministic, right? There's no bridging that happens explicitly. And so there's no real attack vector there within the Paima engine stack. And so the NFTs, the reliance is strictly on the underlying layer 1. And so the stateful stuff that's attached to the NFTs all come out of the layer 2, but because it is a fully open deterministic protocol that eventually anyone will be able to run the back end of Jungle Wars. This is like the long-term vision, is that even for the games that we release, like Jungle Wars, this isn't anytime soon, just to be clear, but we already are in the midst of implementing, and we already have all the designs for how to do this and what needs to be done. Anyone will be able to run the backend of Jungle Wars just like a blockchain node, just like you can run a Cardano node, a Bitcoin node, an Ethereum node, or whatever node. And so with that backend, you will be able to fully deterministically regenerate all the stateful NFT state, and there will never be any quote unquote hack from a bridge because that bridge doesn't explicitly exist in and of itself. And so that's one of the cool things here is that because we put in that research, and I spent all that time up front when initially coming up with Paima Engine, we kind of have this new model where it actually is trustless, right? That's kind of the point of the trustless Web3 gaming, is not to have this heaviness on, centralized Web 2.5 gaming, because, like you said, effectively, games like Axie Infinity, the game company, the game studio, which rewards people the fungible token SLP on chain, they're acting like a fully trusted bridge, right? But from the Paima Engine perspective, because it's a trustless L2, there is no bridge, and that's actually why we have, in our opinion, an entirely new class of games because of this new innovation.
That's great. So as long as you're on Cardano or a trusted, secure L1, you're good.
Yeah, I should also add to this that Paima is leveraging Milkomeda for some parts, as mentioned previously. And Milkomeda itself has been audited multiple times, as well as we've also done a formal verification of the bridge as well.
Awesome. Great question. Next up, we have Salamander, and then our final question will be from Lord.
Hey, so I wanted to just follow up on what you said. So my question is, so you mentioned, about being the first batch of 2,000 NFTs. So I was wondering if the other batches were going to be exactly the same, and it was just going to be a difference of, being numbered up to 2,000. Will they have different designs, or is it exactly the same? And I was also wondering, in terms of, and I forgot my second question, so let's go with the first one.
Okay, cool. The first, it's specifically to the Vulcaneers. The first NFTs, which we have already released and will be integrated into Jungle Wars, just so everyone's on the same page. Effectively, the first batch is 2,000, and there's 2 specific backgrounds. And so effectively, the following batch will have different backgrounds. And so those 2,000 NFTs will be unique from that perspective because the backgrounds will never be reused again. And the second batch, our current plans are to make that batch have 3,000 NFTs and the following one 4,000 and so forth. And so effectively each following batch will have more NFTs to kind of model as we get more adoption, more people want the NFTs. And so to kind of scale that upwards naturally. And so you can argue from that perspective that you can, have a low number, one of the first 2,000, and custom backgrounds that will never be replicated again.
So you actually answered my second question, which was what the timeline would be for rolling out the other batches, but it sounds like it's as necessary, I guess.
Exactly. So it's on demand. So as soon as the first batch is fully minted, the second batch within 12 to 24 hours, we'll be ready. There's a few things we just have to run scripts effectively and get everything fully working, but pretty much it should be within a day or two max. You'll have the second batch ready.
Thank you so much for that great question and the great answer. The final question today is going to be from Lord.
All right, testing. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear, my friend. You sound beautiful.
Hey, awesome. How you doing, everybody? Shout out to Block Jock and Indigo James down there. I do have a question. I heard a few moments ago about running a Paima Studios server, kind of like a Cardano node. Could you go into a little more detail on that, as well as the benefits on both ends of the spectrum for the Paima Studios, as well as the individuals running the server? And I love what you're doing. Keep up the good work. Thank you. And hail Purse.
Yeah, thanks. So effectively, going back to what I said slightly earlier, what Paima Engine does is effectively a framework or an engine that allows a developer to create a layer 2 virtual machine that is the game itself. And so kind of like how you can envision a Cardano node. A Cardano node is effectively running a protocol of the ledger rules of what is actually allowed to happen on the Cardano blockchain, right? So if I submit a Ethereum transaction to a Cardano node, it understands based off of the ledger rules implemented that this, an Ethereum transaction for 1,000,001 reasons is not a Cardano transaction because they're completely different formats, right? And so the Cardano node is the thing that has the ledger rules. And then specifically because it's a layer 1, it also has a bunch of other stuff like consensus and so forth, networking, which at the layer 2 level, we don't have. And so from that perspective, because Paima Engine is an engine that allows you to create your own L2, when you create a game with Paima Engine, you're effectively creating a layer 2 node that's specifically a layer 2 node for your game, which is a custom layer 2. So it's a custom layer 2 node for your game. And so what that means is that just like how you have fully deterministic syncing, so if you're on Cardano or Bitcoin or whatever your favorite chain is, you can start a node from 0 and go through the entire history, and you always get back to the same deterministic state, right? And so the layer 2 node of your game that's built using Paima Engine works in the exact same way. So as long as you have the layer 1 that the game is deployed on, so the entire history of everything that's happened, and you have the layer 2 game node, you can, anyone who has this backend node will be able to replay everything and get to the exact same state. And I guess just one thing to kind of add on there quickly is that this is why stateful NFTs work, right? Because in a Web 2.5 world where all the game state is hidden, right? It's hidden on private servers. They can get hacked. They can get deleted. You can't have stateful NFTs because that state doesn't exist on chain. And you don't have that guarantee, that transparency, that determinism. And so then the whole concept of stateful NFTs wasn't really possible in a Web 2.5 world. With trustless Web3 gaming, we actually have that full reproducibility, just like a classical layer 1 blockchain node, whether Cardano, Bitcoin, or otherwise. And because of that, we then have this new foundation to play off of. And that's why we actually have new primitives like stateful NFTs. And at least from my perspective, I do still think there are new primitives that we still haven't discovered yet. But because we're so early days on this like actual trustless Web3 gaming path, there's still, in my opinion, we'll see what reality actually shows us. But I do feel that there's most likely still new primitives that lay untapped yet, that we're still kind of on the edges of finding out and figuring out.
That is beautiful. Thank you very much for that detailed answer. So I'll step down. Thank you, Pay, for hosting the spot. Keep up the good work. All right. Goodbye, everybody.
Well, I also want to thank everyone for being here today. We're going to go ahead and close the space out. Thank you, Sebastien. Thank you, Paima Studios. Thank you guys for building on Milkomeda. I'm excited to learn more about it and this idea of, the new idea of NFTs. It just seems inevitable. It makes sense, having to burn an NFT anytime you do any action that needs to update that metadata. It just doesn't make sense. And I personally think, video games are a great way to bridge blockchain to average people. So This was an amazing space. I really enjoyed it. I think it's worth a re-listen if you're joining late. And if you guys did enjoy it, I would really appreciate it if all you did was give it a like and retweet so people listen to this afterwards. And I hope you guys all have a good Monday. It's a great way to start off the week. Love you guys. Be safe out there in this cold world. See you guys.